Hi everybody, it's Jim Weigel with Blue Box Auction Gallery here with Armando L. Alvarez, one of our researchers on our team here. And we're talking about some really incredible things that came from a consignor in Eastern Europe. And the items that we have to talk about are just fascinating and have some really interesting historical context that we wanted to check in with Armando, who spent a good amount of time to really learn about them. So welcome, good to have you here today. We have two really significant pieces to showcase, as I said, and the first is a book of quotations by Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao of China, and there's something really interesting about it. So why don't you tell us what's the most interesting thing about the book?
Well, the most interesting thing about the book is that it's signed by Chairman Mao himself, which is exceedingly rare. He's a very prominent figure. I mean, you couldn't walk up to him on the street and get a signature or an autograph. Even if you were a diplomat or a dignitary, sometimes it'd be very difficult to approach him and get that. So it's not like a celebrity or you're going to a concert to see Justin Timberlake and get his autograph.
Yeah.
But it's just an amazing piece, and it's exceedingly rare to have something like this.
Yeah, I would agree. And so it's really rare, like you said. It's very special. There had to be some relationship. What we got from our seller was that it was part of a collection that he acquired, and he's looking forward to sharing this with the world and making it available. But let's dive a little bit further into the book itself. Tell us about the book. Where did it come from? It's known as the Little Red Book, but tell us more why and where it got created. It's
a collection of 200 quotations from Chairman Mao himself that he compiled and was published and very commonly used throughout China during the Cultural Revolution. It's very commonplace for almost every single citizen of China to be carrying it on their person. And it just sort of reflected his ideals and sort of how he expressed himself and his new political revolutionary ideas that was changing China at the time. So it was just a look into his mind and see what he was kind of planning for the future of the People's Republic of China.
Yeah, and Mao was known for his calligraphy, and he took it as an art form as well as a communication form, obviously. But what do you think about that?
Calligraphy is a very significant cultural art in China. So for Mao, it sort of was a way for him to respect his cultural heritage, but then at the same time be able to express all of his different ideas, express his feelings, his sentiments, his emotions. And also at the same time, he took that sort of cultural heritage and that ancient technique and then revolutionized it. He came up with a lot of different techniques that really changed the field during the time period. And it was really kind of incredible to see how this prolific figure using calligraphy and sort of an art form to express himself and use that as a connecting point to his people.
Yeah, and I think it's really neat how you take something or someone that is such a strong, powerful leader and revolutionize the whole entire country decades ago. But he also has a warm, sensitive side and a connection to the arts and shared that with his people. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, yes.
Yeah, really neat. And some historians say the book is one of the most iconic pieces of Maoist China. How does having such a significant copy or edition of it, and this edition we have is the 1967 second printing, which is the English translation of it, but the historical significance, what do you think how that plays? And also mention how many of these copies of this book exist compared to how many actually might be signed by the leader?
Well, the Little Red Book is one of the highest published books of all time. I think it's somewhere around 6.5 billion copies have been published.
Billion with a B.
Billion with a B,
Wow.
Correct. So it's very widely produced, but maybe out of my recollection of 6 signed copies, there are very, very few in existence. So you're taking one of the most popular books of all time and then sort of shrinking it down to only having a very, very select few that have something as important as Mao Zedong's signature. Against the backdrop of it's his 200 quotations book written by him that he used, and having his signature with it sort of gives it just an added cultural value, and someone who's a study of Chinese history or history in general will see it as a really significant piece to own.
Yeah, I would agree. There's cultural value, there's historical value, and as we switch and talk about, let's talk about the second document. The second document is actually a physical document, a piece of paper that has a list of the Chinese delegation at that time being 1950s, right? So we're switching the timeline, almost going backwards here. But the timeline that we're talking about, this delegation signed this document, and the envelope that came with it was really neat too. Tell us about that a little bit.
So for that document, it's took place, or the delegation document and the event in question took place in April of 1954. And it was a meeting between the Hungarian ambassador to Beijing, Andras Sobek, with Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao. And they were meeting together just as normal dignitaries meet and discussing economics and life in general. But it's just really interesting to see that those two people coming together during the Cold War as it's starting to ramp up, and two Sino-Soviet relation countries are sort of kind of coming together and building that trade relationship, and you kind of start to see the divergence of different powers as they align in the Cold War.
Yeah, and so the Sino-Soviet relations is very interesting because there might be more historical significance to this document that we're talking about with the signatures of the whole delegation than meets the eye. So tell us more about how this timeline of the date of this meeting, which is well documented, that relates to the evolution of how world politics took shape.
Well, you think about the year before, 1954, there's a lot of different things that were happening. They just signed the Korean War armistice. There was the Castle Bravo test, so the nuclear war, the threat of nuclear war was starting to build up. Then you also had the death of Joseph Stalin, which is a major blow for the Soviet side. So it's a lot of scrambling back to try to promote their ideology and see who's going to take over now after one of their most prominent figures has passed away. And then you also have the creation of the KGB at the same time too. So there's a lot of things you're starting to see that the Cold War is starting to ramp up as we know it, because those are things that we find commonplace, but back then you wouldn't really think of like spies and nukes and the world on the brink of destruction. But then at that point, you're actually starting to see those little pieces start to form together. So it's really interesting to see two prominent dignitaries speaking and all of those events happening at the same time. That has a really significant historical lens. How are they looking at it? How are they maybe just talking about economics, but there's also a lot interplaying with that. So when they're having these discussions, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of turmoil that's on the horizon. So it's really cool to look into that and have a physical piece of evidence from that time period and seeing how we got from there to now.
Yeah. And so the interesting tie-in with the book and the document is the amalgamation of these quotations was done by one of the people that are on that document. Tell us a little bit more about how they connect together.
Yeah, that's correct. It's Lin Biao. He's one of the dignitaries or a part of the delegation that signed the document. There's also a few other really prominent Chinese figures on there too. Li Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping, who ended up succeeding Mao later in the People's Republic of China, and then also Zhao Enlai, a very prominent diplomat who did a lot of correspondence on the international stage and went to a lot of prominent conferences and conventions that were really necessary at the time.
But Lin Biao, there's a very interesting history. Without getting too deep into the onion, many layers that connect to it, tell us how what transpired with his relationship with Mao, how it was so strong for him to put this book together, and then things changed a little bit.
He was one of Mao's right-hand men. They were very close at the beginning. But then over time, he was named as Mao's successor, which put a strain on their relationship and ended up culminating into Project 571, where it is thought that Lin Biao and his subordinates, as part of the military council, or his son, were taking part in a plot to assassinate Chairman Mao and stage a coup and take over to sort of accelerate that timeline to succeed him. And then he eventually ended up dying under mysterious circumstances in a plane crash in Mongolia as he was fleeing to the Soviet Union.
Right, that's the interesting part, right? So he was fleeing or wasn't fleeing, that's really not been established, but that's the theory, is on his final flight that that's what he was doing. And I might even venture to say that the signature of that leader of China might be more rare than the Mao Little Red Book. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think so, just because it's a historical artifact. The Little Red Book is a cultural piece and a symbol of something completely different. This one kind of puts itself into the center stage of geopolitical history. Yeah. So you really have a tangible piece of two delegate parties meeting together and discussing world-changing ideas or things that are going to influence the financial spheres in a variety of ways, because they were one of the major trading partners with each other too. People don't remember that. They were People's Republic of Hungary and the People's Republic of China were founded in the same year. So there's a lot of ties in understanding international relations in that period. Right. And this is an example of it. It's a physical thing that you can hold and say, wow, like this connects me to that time.
Yeah. Well, that's really neat. I thank you again for doing the research on that. I think it'll be really interesting for our audience to enjoy and hear that. And like we said, there's so many layers to this onion. I mean, you can really dive in much, much deeper, but to have these two really, really historic and significant pieces in our auction is very, very exciting. So we'll look forward to what it transpires. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
I just think this is an amazing piece. Like I've gone down that rabbit hole and have loved researching it and really passionate about it and being able to see that this one event in time was surrounded by so many things. The things I talked about that happened in the year before, but then in like the year immediately after, or even like the weeks after, you have the Geneva Conference, another Hague Convention.
Yeah.
Later in that year, you have the first Taiwan Straits crisis. You have the outbreak of the Vietnam War at the start of 1955.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of things that are interplaying together and starting to ramp up. And it's interesting to see how you have these two signatures of Mao Zedong, but could they be seen as two different versions of Mao? They're all, could be 10 to 20 years apart.
Right.
And a lot of things have happened in the way that they see the world. So you have two things that are similar, but not exactly at the same time. And that's the cool part about it, being able to track that progression and really connect with it and research and be passionate about it.
Yeah.
And that's what I really loved.
Something tells me your research is not going to stop here. You might spend some free time and get a little deeper.
Oh no, I probably will. That's correct.
All right, well, thanks again. And hey, thanks for watching. They're coming up on our next auction, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.